And welcome to another Pro Audio Suite, thanks to Austrian Audio, making passion heard, and Tribooth, the booth on the move. Speaking of Tribooth, I've often wondered, because I've seen other bits and pieces floating around on the interweb, what was the reason for the design or the launch of Tribooth, George?
5, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
To the Pro Audio Suite.
These guys are professional. They're motivated.
With Tex the VO stars, George Whitham, founder of Source Elements, Robert Marshall, international audio engineer, Darren Robbo Robertson, and Global Voice, Andrew Peters. Thanks to Tribooth, Austrian Audio, making passion heard, Source Elements, George the Tech Whitham, and Robbo and AP's international demos. To find out more about us, check the proaudiosuite.com.
Line up, ladies!
Here we go.
Yes. Well, the Tribooth was designed because there's so many products that were already out there marketing to this idea of a portable studio. So when Tribooth was developed, it wasn't like nobody else had come up with the idea of having a collapsible, mail it over UPS, kind of a booth. It had been done. And that's kind of the reason why Tribooth came along, because the other ones were so terrible. They were either much too bulky. I mean, frankly, they were just not very good. They had a lot of issues in terms of weight, in terms of the size of the packaging. We really wanted it to be something that could travel well. And for a while there, Rick actually was using another product. And it was the smallest we got it to fit was into a golf bag portage case, like a hard shell case that you put your golf bag in.
Yeah.
And portable-ish, right? But you still had to check it as a oversized bag, as a sports thing, which depending on the airline means a lot, could be a bit more expensive or a lot more expensive. And so it never met that need of like fitting it into a standardized 23 kilogram, luggage. So that's why we invented it.
So was the Tribooth to actually just save weight because you only needed 3 legs instead of 4, or is there some acoustic value to having 3 corners, just having a triangle?
Excellent question. The acoustic side of it is it's dubious. And the reason why I say that is the booth, the way it works, being this blanket fort, right? Really, is it's not a chamber. Right? It's not like your ISO booth, like the booth behind me or any of the booths that you think of. Those are chambers, and then what you're trying to do is eliminate the sound that's bouncing around inside said chamber. In fact, I got to see Robert's chamber. Robert built a booth in his studio, and it's a work in progress, but he had it very well padded, and it was a very unique shape, right? And
it was.
The more unique, it's in a corner. The more unique the shape is, and the more unusual or odd the shape is, with fewer parallel surfaces, the better off you are. So anyway, with the Tribooth, what's really happening is it's more like an acoustical filter, right? So it's designed to not trap sound inside like a chamber or a box. It's designed to actually allow the sound to pass through it. Right? So that's what's really happening. So it's passing through, and a lot of the energy is dissipated as it passes out into the room. Whatever reflects around the room and comes back in, passes back through the sound panels and back in. Hopefully most of it doesn't return,
Yeah.
And that's the concept. And that's what makes it different. It's kind of hard to quantify. So does it really matter whether it's a square or a rectangle or a triangle or a pentagon or a circle? And I don't believe that it really actually does. I don't have the acoustical measurements and the science to back that up because I haven't really been able to find it. I can't really find the data, like saying this is what's going to happen to a sound wave when it's dampened from 3 non-parallel surfaces or 1 circular surface, right? Because it's not designed to be reflective. Maybe I'm overcomplicating the explanation, but it doesn't seem to matter. Yeah. It's really a practical thing. We wanted it to be as light as we could get it. And that was something that Rick came up with. One day I'll never forget it. He had a drinking straw mock-up of it. with the triangle floor plan, and he stuck it. He's like, "What do you think of this?" And I was like, "Yeah,
That's great.
I think you got something there, right?"
Yeah,
because the thing about the triangle shape is, think about just envision yourself inside a small booth, right? What is the least necessary part of said booth in terms of space, right? It's not the area next to you, right? You need to be able to move your arms. You need to be able to do this. It's really
behind the mic.
It's the area up in the front is mostly wasted space on either side of the mic, right? Yeah. And so that's how we started to realize, like, wow, we can really save space. We can make better use of the space that we have, thereby using less materials, less blankets, less frames, less weight, on and on and on and on. And that really was one of the main things that got us the design patent, was the fact that it was a triangle.
Yeah. It also allowed you, because I know with my Tribooth, like all of them, you've got that portion from the top sort of down to waist height, roughly, of a double layer.
Right. Yes.
Where if you had been square, you couldn't have done that, because that would have been all the weight without the double layer.
Yeah. So that was another just experimental thing. So we first, of course, did the conventional thing, which was to take the entire sound blanket, hang it from the top, and have it go to the floor, right? That's conventional. That's what everybody else does, right? And then we started experimenting with adding layers. And we're like, what's the diminishing returns of adding more and more layers of blankets? Well, you could double up the layers, and that does damp more sound, but it gets heavier very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, we couldn't pack it into a suitcase, right? So then we're like, well, how do we continue to maximize the performance of the materials that we can transport? We pretty much figured out the maximum amount of stuff that we can fit in the suitcase with the frames and with all the other accessories, and still have it be at that critical under 50 pound, under 23 kilogram weight limit. And once we were there, and we're like, okay, do we fold it in half? Do we have it a third? So what happens is really about a third of the blanket is folded over the top, creating that double thick layer that's closest to the microphone. And then you have another portion that hangs down below. And then you have the space open at the bottom. And that is another one of those things that makes it unusual and kind of messes with your head, because you're thinking, wait a minute, how can this thing be any good? There's a huge, huge open space underneath.
Yeah.
How can that work, right? So that was something that we just learned through testing. I mean, I'll be honest, it was a lot of just trial and error. It wasn't like a ton of mathematic calculations and acoustics and physics. It was just practical things and experimenting to see what worked. So once we got that double layer at the top third of the height of the booth, then we realized how important that same double layer was on the ceiling. Because when we first set up the booth in his one of Rick's houses where he was living at the time, we had this unusual room that had hardwood floors and a low flat ceiling. It was very Spartan, which was actually the perfect place to test it. It was very reverberant. And when we only had one layer of blanket on the roof, it was still kind of reverberant in there. It was not doing an awesome job. But when we threw another layer on the roof, it dropped down the echo quite a bit. It was like really a big difference. And we were like, man, we have to put another layer of blanket material on the roof. And so that was just another thing out of pure testing. I would go over to Rick's place every couple of weeks or so, and we would just test things and experiment, and that's what how we came up with what you're essentially what you're getting today, 5 years later.
The funny thing is when you did the Tribooth, as an experiment, I decided I was going to make my own.
I was privy to that.
Are there
that was interesting.
Yeah.
Pictures, or it didn't happen?
It
happened.
Yeah, it happened. And
I'm there going, Andrew, should you be doing this?
Yeah. So I built one. It was actually square. And I actually calculated how much it cost me in materials, because I was thinking, this thing can't be that expensive, surely. I think my materials end up costing me about $600 or something from memory.
Those blankets can't be cheap.
No, but it was a whole lot.
blankets.
It was just all the, the bungee, the hooks,
The cheap part
everything.
was the PVC, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
But then
exactly.
you need the know-how, and then you need the the
if you use the
wherewithal and the
PVC
tools
that you buy at the hardware store, it's going to be standard plumbing material, and it's functional. It works, right? But what we're using is what they call a furniture grade PVC. So it's a good deal more expensive, and it looks way better, right? And then
it doesn't have like all the purple writing on it and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. You should just drip the glue. You know how when they're done installing this stuff, they're like
there's
glue, and then they just like shove it together
with a little ball sponge, and they just go.
the blue glue.
Exactly. You should just have that purple shit all over it.
Well, some of that glue or type of glue is used in the assembly in specific joints that we do not want to have come apart. But again, Rick is doing all that assembly by hand, booth by booth, and he's very particular about how it looks. He's he really cares a lot about how the fit and finish looks, and that there's no glue and there's no things are aligned and things are consistent.
How many are out there? If I may,
I think we've well past the 300 mark, so we're in the 320 something like that mark. And
that's pretty good.
Considering again a boutique product that's being made by hand. It's pretty amazing. And it's 5 years later, the thing is still completely relevant. 5 years later, there's still not something that's on the market that's a direct replica. Whether they would do it, I don't trust China to respect a patent.
No.
They could care less.
Yep.
So nobody's come out of China yet with a knockoff of it, right? So either they don't see the value, they don't understand it, or they just simply don't want to make one. I don't know, because they knock off everything. So
the Temu Tribooth.
Well, so one of the parts that makes the booth hard to replicate.
Trimu.
The Temu Trimu.
One of the things that makes the booth relatively expensive and hard to replicate are the corner pieces that give it the triangle shape. They're adjustable angle pieces. Those were hard to find, and they're kind of expensive. In a perfect world, we would have those blow molded or injection molded and made custom for us. We would have to buy like a couple of thousand of those things,
Yeah.
So scaling was impossible, right? It's again, if a company saw real value in knocking this thing off, that had the scalability, which is obviously some factory in China, they could do it, and it hasn't happened yet. I don't know if it ever will. And whatever the case is, I mean, we've come up with something that those that get it, and those that use it tend to love it. The only thing people ever complain about is just that it is pretty bulky, in terms of something that's portable. It's still pretty bulky to travel with. And there are a lot of cases where people will opt to not bring it because they just don't quite want to lug it along for a weekend long trip.
Andrew, you've had that situation, haven't you? Where you've just done the booth umbrella instead?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have. And look, if I'm going somewhere where it's a hot climate and I don't need much luggage, perfect. If I'm going somewhere that's winter and I need a suitcase, then it gets tricky because all of a sudden I'm trying to find someone to share a suitcase with. And, the other half prefers that I don't have my clothes in her overfull suitcase.
She doesn't want your grungy jocks in her suitcase, I can imagine.
No, she just doesn't have room because she takes pretty well everything she owns in the suitcase.
Well, the other one that we've talked about, you and I, AP, with the Tribooth, is if you were sort of plane hopping, if you were doing one of those holidays where you're going from here to there to the next spot, it's going to be pretty difficult too, right? But, I think you took it up the coast though once, I remember.
I've taken it quite a few places. It's been Sydney, Byron, Adelaide.
Byron's the one I was thinking of,
Yeah, it was great.
George, how about this for a business? You ready? Like, Rick stocks 50 booths and he ships them, and the person pays shipping and a weekly fee, and it just shows up at their hotel. And when they're done, they box it up, and Rick's got a return label, and that's all part of it.
Yep. That was that was year one. We talked about that.
Well, that was the bookable part, wasn't it? Isn't that where Tribooth Bookable came from?
No, actually, Bookable is Rick's own coaching business. He's been coaching.
I always thought Bookable was like you could book one, and I thought that was the eventual plan, that you'd be able to book one and have it just wherever you turned up. There you go. So I've learned something new from this episode. There you go.
But Andrew, would that be worth like what, $100, $100 a week plus like shipping?
If it was well, you'd have to have the stock here because the shipping from the States to Australia would.
Well, Rick will
Be
send
hundreds.
you a few, and you'll get a small commission for shipping them out.
No, renting the booth has been something we've tried to figure out a model around, and it's come up a couple of times, and I think there may be a case where we've actually done it, where Rick actually did something
Ship
like
one
that.
out.
But we had a case where we tried to ship one to New Zealand and to get there on time for a production, and it just didn't get there on time for the production. So then it kind of blew.
That's right, I remember that. Yeah.
Kind of blew the whole thing.
Sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah, it costs a
so-
lot then.
Yeah, so the just-in-time part of it can be tricky. You definitely have to have them locally available, at least in the country where they need to be. And so we've looked at rental houses here in Los Angeles, and it's a tough sell. And I think it's because of its size. They could have a lot of microphones sitting in the same place as one of these things, and it just takes up a lot of space. So I don't know. I would love to do it. I think there's a lot of good reasons for it. We would love to not have to have everybody buy it when they know they only want to use it once a year. It just, we haven't quite been able to, again, it's scaling it. It's the funding of it. It's the storage and the logistics, all those things. If we could get a rental company that does pro audio rental to buy them and rent them, we would fully encourage doing that. It just
a
hasn't
thought.
happened.
What about, like, we have staging connections here that do all the big gigs and all that sort of stuff that hire out, PAs and all that sort of gear. There must be companies like that all around the world.
yeah.
Would they
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's
be
what he's talking
interested?
about with the rental companies and stuff.
Yeah, we just haven't had the right the silver bullet in terms of what they want and what we just haven't found the right connections yet. They're out there. We just haven't beat the ground yet. I think we literally have to just do the calls,
Do you know who you should talk to? You should talk to U2's management, because when U2 were out here on the Zoo TV tour, had the big TV displays on the stage and all that sort of stuff. One of the breakfast jocks who I worked with, a guy called Rob Duckworth, he's really good mates with the band, and he actually got me and a couple of other guys underneath the stage where they had like video editing going on and all sorts of shit. They had 2 voice booths in the corner, 2 like little portable voice booths over in the corner where they were doing voiceovers and
carpet
Bono would
booths?
record Mephisto and all that sort of
what
stuff.
were these
It was really
booths?
cool.
Were they like wooden with
They were
carpet on?
they was something they'd cobbled together themselves. It wasn't
Yeah.
anything that I'd ever seen. I was just like, holy crap, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking, what, 94, 93, something
It was
like that?
94.
Yeah,
That sort
the
of
thing
thing.
is, when it's a touring show, they've got riggers, they've got hundreds and hundreds of yards of heavy velvet blankets. I mean, a quilted curtain. They essentially have the raw building blocks,
Yeah.
and the riggers and the swing crew and the grips and all that. They're pretty resourceful. They'll make that stuff on the spot.
Yeah.
So it's still like this niche thing where like it's for somebody who doesn't have those access to those resources,
Yeah.
but what still would like to have something like this, and we'll find that audience yet. We're gonna find them. It's just we haven't been as ambitious as to wanting to scale it yet. We would like to, but we haven't wanted. We haven't.
Yeah, well, you want to
taken
nail
the big
down the
step
product
yet.
first, right? And then worry about that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Here's an idea. How about if you do rent it, you rent it with a Passport VO,
Yeah.
And an Austrian audio microphone.
Austrian audio
and headphones.
microphone and headphones.
And a Source Connect license.
And a Source Connect license. Or a temporary, or a
You're supposed to
temporary
already
Source
have a
Connect
Source Connect
license.
license.
Yeah, all you have to do is bring your laptop.
Two-day
That's all you need.
license.
Yeah. Well, I mean, packages are clearly another way of doing it. Like, I think for those that don't travel often, that would be awesome, right?
Mm.
A lot of my voice clients that would buy this thing, they travel quite a lot. So they have their travel kit,
Yeah.
So it's still like a niche thing for that guy who travels really once a year with the family, does the big vacation, and wants to have a whole turnkey setup, literally sitting in the hotel when he arrives. And that is another niche clientele, that we haven't really serviced.
How often when you're in a hotel is outside noise the issue? Like, I know the hotel room doesn't sound good, but the Tribooth should kind of take care of deadening up the return off the walls and
Yeah.
everything.
I mean, it's outside noise and it's inside noise. So
Yeah,
some of the outside
like my
noise
heater
is
right here.
the obvious stuff, right? Traffic or a busy street. The inside noise is like the HVAC system, the vacuuming upstairs, the people running around upstairs, the fridge.
a couple having sex next door.
The occasional couple having sex, which is pretty rarely happens during the
Or
daylight
people
hours.
having sex in your bedroom.
Yeah. Mom, Dad, shut up.
I'm trying to
that's
record.
gross.
Is that what it's like when she tries to do a voiceover session?
Oh gosh. Oh my god. I don't know.
Could you like have a little like just like the breaths are a little bit too much? Could you lower the breaths?
Yeah.
Exactly. You know what? Some of my clients have told me like I didn't expect it to be soundproof because we know it can't be soundproof, but we had a few people tell us like it was soundproof enough. Like it knocked down enough ambient noise to make a noticeable difference. And how to quantify that? Like, you'll notice we don't have a spec that says we'll reduce noise by X because it depends on the sound, depends on the intensity, depends on the frequency.
Depends on the microphone you're using,
Depends on so
blah.
many factors.
Yeah.
And we just don't want to throw out numbers that can't be verified and backed up. That's why it can be a little hard to sell to numbers people who want to see specs. I want to see stats. I want to see, NRC and all this stuff. And it's like, someday maybe we'll get it to Riverbank Labs and they'll do the NRC readings on the materials. And it would be cool to do that. But more practical would be to just simply set the mic up in there, play a noise outside, and then take the blanket down and play the same noise. And then what's the difference in
Figure
noise,
it out. Exactly.
Yeah.
But what you're essentially doing is what we always talk about, is doing the most you can before you have to return to plugins and all that sort of stuff. You're doing everything you can in a situation where you're not in control of a lot of stuff. You're doing everything you can before you hit it with noise reduction, before you hit it with de-reverb, before you blah, 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 blah. That, to me, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
That's what I do, Robbo. I do everything I can.
You work hard. I mean, you sweat over this stuff at night. Well, shit, I'm recording tomorrow. What can I do for Robbo to make his life easier? Let me think about hang on. I know what I'll do. I'll wear 2 microphones. In fact, what I'll do is I'll send him both on the one track.
Exactly. Yeah. But I actually use my Tribooth in a couple of really pretty trying environments. Yeah. Use a Tribooth in trying environments. And one was in Byron, and we were literally on the beach, so it was constant, ocean noises, waves and stuff.
Yeah.
And the other one was in a hotel, but I was in the sort of lounge area, but it was the partition between the bedroom and that was glass.
Oh wow!
And that was the only place I could put it was next to the glass, which should have been
super echoey.
Oh, should have been awful. It worked.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And then, in terms of what you can put in the booth, this is right off the website, So, we just did a
few.
What headphones
have big red? What is that?
Audio Technica ATH M50s. They make all kinds of custom ear pads. And all kinds of stuff. But
does it come with a water bottle too? Does it? That's cool.
And yeah, we just did a few pictures for people that are not as imaginative. What do I put in the booth?
What could it look like?
This first one is just the most basic version, which actually in this case, the universal audio interface is outside the booth. So, sometimes having less stuff in the booth is the way to go, and
totally.
Just have it sitting outside on a desk and just have a less cluttered environment, right? So in this case, there's nothing in the booth except mic, headphones, and a script. This is, in this case, the script is on an iPad, right? I think that's a pretty ideal setup. It's the less is more approach, less gear, less stuff in the way. If you really want to have the DAW in front of you, then there's your typical MacBook sitting on the copy holder shelf, and the copy holder shelf is strong enough to hold the weight of most modern Macs. It might be a little bit.
That's like a Yamaha mixer on the.
Yeah, that's an AG03 actually in that picture. Yeah. And these pictures are pretty old. In fact, they're so old where these are the original blankets that had a blue border on them. So these are pretty old pictures now. And then,
Glass of wine
so
too. Nice.
exactly,
Glass of wine.
wine. Yeah, good eye, good eye.
Yeah.
That gets the reads going smoothly.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then an iPhone for timing at the bottom there.
Was I there that day when you were doing? No, I don't think.
You never finished that glass.
Exactly. And then this was just the super light version, which is an iPad with an Apogee mic, which actually I recorded somebody at WovoCon where it was just, she had a Yeti Junior or the Yeti, whatever the little
They made
tiny
a worse
cheap,
Yeti than the Yeti?
They really do. They get smaller and
That's
worse.
not bad enough.
And we used it, and it wasn't amazing sounding, but it was quite usable. She was happy. So yeah, you can just throw that up in there with your iPad and go for it. And then this is just like an example of just using the booth for doing like an appearance or meetings or something. And
I thought it meant it came with George the Tech on call. It's like, George, what the fuck's going on?
it can.
I can't get it to work.
For the right price.
I can't get pole A to go into pole B. What the fuck's going on?
Yeah, and in this case, he's got a lav microphone on in this shot. So, but I mean, these are just a few examples of what you could do with the setup. But
I like that light. I like the light and the way it's. How does that connect to
it's really good.
How does that connect to the blanket?
It's
or
got
doesn't
like
it?
elastic straps up there.
There are some straps pre-sewed into the roof. The roof of the booth is the most complex single fabricated thing in the whole product because it's a triangle. So making it's a little bit more complicated. It has a piece that has to be sewn in for the second layer. That's actually not that easy to sew. And then you have the loops, the little straps for the light. There's a lot that goes into making that.
How do you sew a moving blanket? Jesus, the sewing machine must be industrial.
Well, I'll tell you, for a very long time, it was just Rick's wife using essentially consumer grade, high quality, but the machines would occasionally just fail. They would break down.
I can imagine. Poor sewing machine be like, fuck.
It was too much for the machine. Yeah. So he's finally found someone to help do the sewing, like a professional sewing service with the better machines. And it took a long time, though. He was very picky. We tried a few companies.
But then he had to order them in bulk, and that's where it's like that whole thing of like, how many do you order? Because if enough of that, and he's making his own corner pieces out of PVC.
Right. These are made in batches of 10. So that's how it goes. And getting all the different pieces in time and on a fair price. The thing is that we haven't raised the price because, we're idiots. So the profit margin has shrunk over the years because everything is more expensive.
Everything's gone up.
Yeah.
Everything. So as you said, Andrew, when you added up the price and what it costs you down there, it's essentially costing us $500+ in just raw materials, just all the bits and pieces. And it's kind of where we're at, and the rest of it is time. It's time, labor, and overhead and all that. So, and then it's also me, because every time you buy a booth, it includes me setting up processing or doing a consult with you to get everything fine-tuned. So that's also part of it.
How much are they?
$1,500 US. And believe that's still including shipping to the lower 48 states of the US.
Including shipping. And Andrew, you said that, so in Australian, that'd be $1 million? What would that be?
Yes, about
2.5, I think, something like
2.5 million pesos or something.
Australian pesos.
Yeah.
And a couple of cans of Foster's, apparently.
Yeah. I think it's about a bit over $2,000. No, it's about $2,000. Over 2,000, about 2,200, I think.
So you figure at least a quarter of that, more like 2/3 of that, or a third of that is just materials, not including how much time did it take you to put it all together, Andrew?
Oh, God. And it was shit, to be quite honest.
Right. And then it still doesn't even
It took me a long
good.
time to make a shit product. So
I'm looking at our own website, which I have not looked at in some time, and apparently there's a rentals request.
Well, there you go. We just spoke about it.
There is.
So
one stand.
We do have a
that's how quick he
individual
works.
and
He
expo
just heard
rentals.
me suggest it, and he's like,
Exactly.
I'll do that.
Yeah. So
I mean, by the time Andrew spends 10 hours doing this, and anybody values their time.
Rick's been watching this episode swearing continually, going, George, for fuck's sake, we do rentals.
Sorry, Rick. I should probably know our own product, huh?
Now Robbo's going to edit out half of the episode.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You provide, just scroll back down for me, George. What's it say down the bottom there? You provide what?
There is a security deposit. Yeah.
You provide Tribooth is ideal for recording artists who find themselves needing an affordable. You provide the mic, interface, computer, and the talent. Well, there'll be a few people out there who probably can't supply that part. We provide the rest. The entire unit packs down large.
Yeah, instead of having to require people to have insurance and all that stuff, which is most pro rental houses in Hollywood, you cannot rent a damn thing without an insurance policy, and you got to show you have a COI, and we're not doing that. We're essentially charging you the price of the booth as a deposit on your credit card, and then when you return it, you get back the balance. Is how it's working.
It's more like a restocking fee.
Yeah, sort of.
So the security deposit, you could almost buy one. The security deposit.
Well, that is essentially covers the cost of the booth.
Yeah,
pretty much.
So if someone runs off with it, you could.
Yeah, it makes us whole no matter what happens.
Yeah.
You know,
well, it's a pretty cheap Tribooth if you can get it for $117, isn't it?
Right.
No, it's $1,600 deposit. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. It is available in that form factor. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Well,
how would you do that though? I mean, obviously that's not international. That's only going to be in the States, I guess, to put a caveat on that. I can't imagine that would be anyone here in Australia
the shipping
or the
costs
UK.
are factored into this. So you're basically getting a quote. So you go here, you put in that information, and then we will send you a quote.
Yeah.
So
because more days was less money if you saw it.
Yeah, it's graduated. 30 days, you save
68%
68% off the rate. So
Okay.
yeah. I mean, who's going to rent it for 30 days? I have no idea, because you might as well just buy it.
Pretty much.
If you rent it for a month, you've pretty much bought the booth.
much paid for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it just depends. I mean, productions write things off on their rentals. It's, they can 100% write it off.
True.
They don't have to amortize the cost. There's a lot of reasons why productions rent a lot of their stuff.
They want to forward the cost to a client, and that's the only way to do it, because it's not a tangible good that you're buying.
Yep. And they just don't want to have to do anything with it after the production.
Yeah.
So they don't want to have to physically dispose of it or sell it. So there's reasons why rentals make a lot of sense, and a lot of things in Hollywood are done on rentals, on a rental basis.
I think that happens with was it vocalbooth.com? Who's got the birds?
Me.
They're cute.
They made a nest
I think
outside
it was
my window.
vocalbooth.com, but they did the booths for the Olympics, right? It's like a month of heavy duty broadcasting, people doing voiceovers, this and that. They build them in like France or whatever the hell it is. And they're like, don't take them home. And those are, $4,000 booths.
Yeah.
And a few of them. And they're just like, we don't want them back.
That's how, film productions, it blows me away with how much waste is on a film set or a TV show.
Or like
so much is
conventions.
destroyed and thrown away.
You see these things that they build in conventions, and they just get tossed.
I know.
It's
I know.
crazy.
I know. Taking
They're
get
building
tossed
houses.
from shows. One of my clients owns a piece of the proscenium from the Ed Sullivan show when the Beatles were on the show, and he has a chunk of the backdrop, the proscenium, with their signatures on it.
Yep.
Wow.
And now it's worth dough.
That was all getting thrown out. It was all just getting chopped down and thrown in a pile. And one of the crew was like, "Oh, signatures of these guys from England. That could be worth something."
Yeah. A mate of mine has a mate, so this is twice removed story, but remember Gladiator, the movie? Russell Crowe had the carvings of his wife and his son that he used to.
Those little things.
A mate of my mates actually bought those at an auction just not long after the movie, and for 2/10 the fuck all, and they're now sitting on a shelf in his room. Can you imagine what they'd be worth now? It'd be like that'd be nuts.
Yeah, that stuff is a big.
Well, you have to wait till Russell dies.
Yeah, well, there you go. Then they'll go through the roof. Yeah.
You'll probably choke on a hamburger.
We love you, Russ.
Yeah. I got a hamburger. Where's my hamburger? Hamburger.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Well,
So
on
there
that
you go.
note, I'm hungry.
I'm hungry too.
Should we put a pin in that one?
Go
Big Mac.
shoot that bird and cook it.